During the last 2 weeks, we've been learning a lot about China, economic, political and social. We've also talked a little bit about the climate and the impact of pollution on the climate, and as students, we've witnessed and experienced that. This week, the Chinese government made it more possible for the market to support companies coming into China. The question is, at what economic cost? Team A4 will be exploring Chinese economy, its development and the impact on the climate.
It doesn't matter if a cat is black or white, so long as it catches mice. It did not matter whether an economic policy was considered to be capitalist or socialist. What really mattered was whether that policy boosted the economy. With that pragmatism, Deng Xiaoping, at that time in semi-retirement but still widely acknowledged as power behind the throne, boosted reforms in China. A country with approximately 9.6 million square kilometers and a population of around 1.35 billion, China has become the world's second largest economy and the largest manufacturer of tradable goods. All of this thanks to the impulse given by Xiaoping's reforms. These reforms started with incentives for farmers, giving them the ability to sell part of their crops on the free market, creating 4 special economic zones along the coast for the purpose of attracting foreign investment, incentivizing the startup of private enterprises, and giving economic control of various enterprises to provincial and local governments, basically decentralizing government to benefit the economy, which were generally allowed to operate and compete under free market principles, rather than under the direction and guidance of the state's planning. Several reforms and actions were done step by step, extending them to the rest of the Chinese landscape and applying the methodology of crossing the river by touching the stones. With all of that, China's real gross domestic product grew at an average annual rate of nearly 10% from 1979, when economic reforms began, up until 2012, supporting the rapid economic growth by 2 main factors: large-scale capital investment, financed by large domestic savings and foreign investment, and rapid productivity growth, mainly based on the low cost of labor. But to arrive at this point, a price has to be paid. The most important component of that price, which is the focus of this video, is the environmental degradation behind China's amazing economic growth. China, with an average of 80% of energy is based on coal, has become the largest greenhouse gas emitter since 2005, followed by the USA with 16% and the European Union with 11% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. The World Bank and the Ministry of Environmental Protection of China calculate that annually as many as 750,000 people die prematurely in China from respiratory diseases related to air pollution, and according to studies by the organization PNAS, Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, life expectancy has been reduced by 5.5 years in areas with severe pollution, such as northern China. But it's not just air pollution, water pollution, and soil deterioration that are an important part of this issue. As was declared by Pan Yue, Vice Minister, Ministry of Environmental Protection, the environment can no longer keep pace. Acid rain is falling on 1/3 of the Chinese territory. Half of the water in our 7 largest rivers is completely useless, while 1/4 of our citizens do not have access to clean drinking water. 1/3 of the urban population is breathing polluted air, and less than 20% of the trash in cities is treated and processed in an environmentally sustainable manner. Finally, 5 of the 10 most polluted cities worldwide are in China. Because air and water are polluted, we are losing between 8 and 15% of our gross domestic product. Judith Shapiro, director of the Master's Programs in Natural Resources and Sustainable Development at the School of International Service at American University in Washington, D.C., in her book, China's Environmental Challenges, notes that severe water pollution affects 75% of China's rivers and lakes, and 28% are unsuitable even for agricultural use, according to her 2012 book. Hu Ziyi, Vice Minister of Water Resources in China, said water shortages, serious river pollution, and the deteriorating aquatic ecology are, quote, quite outstanding, and may threaten the country's sustainable growth. About 2/3 of Chinese cities are, quote, water needy, while nearly 300 million rural residents lack access to drinking water. Mr. Ziyi states that about 20% of rivers are so polluted that their water quality was rated even too toxic to come into contact with. Last but not least, statistics released by the Ministry of Land and Resources show that more than 10% of China's arable land has been contaminated by heavy metals such as cadmium, arsenic, and mercury, scattered mainly in the southern parts of the country. Anything grown in these contaminated landscapes will contain harmful elements that affect the health and safety of people. Every year, up to 12 million tons of grain is contaminated by heavy metals, causing annual financial losses of over 20 billion RMB, or US 3.14 billion, in agriculture, and could soon become a threat to China's food security. Coal use in China has moved from 55% to 80% of China's energy fuel source. The lack of environmental regulations and the rapid expansion of coal use has fostered increased greenhouse gas emissions, particulate matter, and occurrence of acid rain in areas where power generation plants are located. According to a World Bank report in 2010, after the reforms introduced in 1979, China's energy use per capita grew 283% up through 2010. China has used their own coal resources to produce electricity, including coal reserves from Inner Mongolia and Shaanxi province, and poor quality coal rich in sulfur and ash located in the south of China. In addition to the sulfur coming from coal power plants, the other factor that contributes to acid rain is the poor quality of fuels refined by state-owned companies. As an example, even though trucks and buses running in China are far worse for the environment than any other vehicles, the oil companies have not helped to solve the problem and have delayed for years an improvement in diesel fuel that those vehicles burn. As a result, the sulfur levels of diesel in China are at least 23 times that of the United States. Acid rain also has an effect on water quality, but other sources of pollution contribute more to the poor water situation China has today. The level of fresh water is about 1,730 cubic meters per year per person. This is only 30 cubic meters above what the United Nations considers the minimum acceptable level. Aside from the fact that coal industries and power stations use 17% of the total water, the mining industry has been also polluting it. Toxic acids required to process the minerals and mildly radioactive slurry tailings, which contain uranium in rare earth element ores, are the two main sources of water pollution. The other source of water pollution is industry, in particular textile and electronics, as is pointed out by the data available at the Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs. As it has been with the power generation industry, the lack of regulations and enforcements, together with the inefficient use of water resources, has been damaging the water quality and diminishing its availability for agricultural activities. A domino effect is being seen, and water pollution is having a huge impact on agricultural activity. This has brought concerns by China's society about food safety. Analysts predict that if this situation is not addressed now, China will suffer from bans on food exports, such as those Tyson Foods has announced recently. This could create an increase of food imports, which in the end will impact commodity prices for all the world. The final piece that completes the circle is soil degradation, that China has been suffering since 1980. For soil degradation, the same reasons mentioned about water and air pollution have been bearing soil degradation up to the current situation. The climate changes generated by huge amounts of greenhouse gas emissions, water pollution, and the intensive use of its natural resources. China's government has been very reluctant over the years to recognize the environmental problems the economic expansion has generated. Meanwhile, the economic model has been really supportive on energy-intensive and high-pollutant industries. Different organizations like the World Health Organization, the World Bank, the Asia Development Bank, and some non-governmental organizations have been consistently reporting the problems and its effects. Finally, a great move came in February this year, when China's Environment Ministry presented a 5-year plan on tackling pollution. Part of the document says, quote, "In recent years, toxic and hazardous chemical pollution has caused many environmental disasters, cutting off drinking water supplies and even leading to severe health and social problems, such as cancer villages." Chinese society has been, over the last years, increasing its concern about the environmental situation and food safety, pushing authorities to address the problem. Other reactions have come from the social networks like Weibo, Douban, and Tencent, with different informational campaigns to make noticeable the environmental problems, which finally forced the government to recognize and start to address the situation. Two of the challenges facing non-governmental organizations are the conflicting messages and behavior from government. On one hand, it investigates soil quality. On the other, it withholds reports. Similarly, it supposedly is making the environment a policy priority, but in contradiction, it is making it easy for companies to breach environmental standards. We've had the opportunity to interview Matthew Collins in Beijing, an IPE project manager who has been working for several years in China.
Okay, so IPE was founded in 2006, and the idea was to create a central location for a lot of the information that was being released by the local government, the local Chinese government. And the idea was to put it into a space that people could easily access, which is the pollution map database, as we call it. Okay, so you've got the pollution map database here, so you can look at individual provinces and get data, for instance, environmental quality information, regional discharge data, and also information on companies with supervision records. So this is companies that have some kind of environmental compliance problem, and you can check the database, which now has 130,000 different records in it. So another map that we have here is the location of pollution sources, and over the past couple of years we've been trying to locate on this digital map some of the biggest discharges in China. So if we zoom in a little bit, you can see that this area around here, this is a big textile manufacturing area. And if we have a look at these factories, you can see some of these factories. This is a dyeing fabric mill. You can see it's got a supervision record for 2013. You can have a look at the record. Since 2007, IPE has been engaging with big name brands. So working with brands like Coca-Cola, Unilever, and asking them to use this resource, this database of 135,000 supervision records, to do comparisons of their suppliers in China with our database of suppliers with supervision records. And the idea is that they do these regular comparisons, and then they can contact these companies and ask them to provide us with some information. Over 150 have also been through the third-party auditing procedure as well to have their records removed from the IP database. So some of the big success stories we've had in terms of these brands pushing their suppliers. One of them was a big electronics brand pushed one of its suppliers to actually correct the very serious problems they had with their wastewater discharge. They were discharging copper and nickel into the local lake, and they've actually pushed this supplier to correct the problems they had, but not just correct them, but also to start a huge remediation project of the lake and dredging the lake for the sediment that had been contaminated. So this is one of the big success stories we have.
Despite the greater degree of openness, the weak approach to environmental penalties is a concern for non-governmental organizations. IPE has records of 135,000 companies that breach regulations. Repeat offenders are fined annually. It's rare for a company to be closed down. Fines are very low, 20 to 30,000 RMB, which is insignificant, and are treated like a tax, so they become a cost of doing business. It doesn't change behaviors. If environmental breaches are serious, production could be stopped, but the local Environmental Protection Bureau has little power and is overridden by other interested parties, for example, local party officials or mayors. One of these examples is depicted in the Academy Award-nominated documentary, The Warriors of Quangang, a 39-minute film from 2010 related to the Chinese village of Quangang. The village is located in the suburbs of Bengbu City of Anhui Province in central eastern China. The documentary tells how a group of Chinese villagers put an end to the poisoning of their land and water by 3 chemical plants, the worst one being Yukailo Chemical Company, after years of fighting. Rather than relying on ineffective government regulations, the non-governmental organizations formed the Green Choice Alliance in 2007 with the objective of getting buyers and consumers to influence suppliers to alter standards of behavior. This approach is starting to have effects, with companies like Apple completely adjusting their behaviors in China, and as a result, impacting the way Chinese suppliers are looking at the problem. This is a good example regarding the potential impact of non-governmental organizations' activities. There is nothing more real and powerful than direct feedback from people who are living and suffering this environmental problem. We had the opportunity to spend some time with Juan, an expat that has been living in Beijing and working for an international company since 2011 after moving from New York City.
We moved to China 2 years ago. We lived in States and haven't really thought about all the ecology, just maybe shopping organic or going to Trader Joe was as far as we cared about this. When we came to China, all of a sudden we realized that we cannot drink tap water even if we boil it, that there are days when you couldn't see 200 meters in front of you because it's just smoke and you don't want to inhale it, and you couldn't trust the food quality. So all these issues came together. When we order bottled water, we have to check it's not fake because supposedly 80% of it is fake in Beijing. So we were told, so we have to really scratch the numbers, go to the website, check that this batch, this code is actually assigned to this mineral water or Nestle distilled water and it's real. Every time we leave home, we check app on our iPhone for what is the AQI, Air Quality Index. We get the number from US Embassy, we get the local Beijing numbers, we compare, we look at the graphs, we get the distributions, we judge whether we need to wear masks that we brought from the United States because we don't quite trust to buy them here. So that's about air pollution. We have 2 air cleaning machines running non-stop round the clock in our apartment. And when it comes to food, obviously we hear all the stories that the cooking oil could be fake or very third. We have to watch what we buy, and given a choice, we would pay premium to buy foreign manufactured because there is very little trust. So then you get, once you solve all these problems, once you hedge away all these risks, then you're left with enjoying your stay in China, which is a great place to be.
In some way, the statement from Ma Jun, one of the country's best-known environmental activists, is giving us the starting point for analyzing how to move forward. He says, "The real number one barrier to environmental protection in China is not lack of money or technology, it is lack of motivation. We need the public to provide that motivation, but they must be informed before they can participate in any meaningful way. But a better understanding of the current situation is needed, where the leaders neglect to say that infighting within the government's bureaucracy is one of the biggest obstacles to develop and impose stronger environmental policies. At the same time, state-owned enterprises, precisely those that have been putting profits ahead of health, such as China's oil and power companies, are given critical roles in policymaking on environmental standards. With this status quo, it looks quite evident that the change has to become boosted by the different stakeholders, starting first by understanding the need for common good of the citizens, and second, their ability to promote it with bottom-to-top pressure and top-to-bottom regulation. An example of the bottom-to-top pressure can be the words declared by Shaun Rain, Managing Director of the China Market Research Group. He says, "A lot of consumers are saying, who cares if I have a great job? Who cares if I can buy a Louis Vuitton bag? If the air and water are killing my family?" Chinese people care a lot about this, and social media has supported information sharing and puts pressure on policymakers. The public are becoming more vocal about it and are protesting on the streets. The Chinese government has invested billions in online monitoring that works in real time and goes straight to environmental agencies, so it's much harder to fabricate data. Air quality data is a good example where pressures led to hourly air quality data being made available for people. These data can be extremely powerful, and social media has been using this power. Another good example of social pressure in water pollution has been the Apple turnaround, pushing their supplier to improve the manufacture process of microprocessor parts. But all of this will be unproductive if government policies won't eventually filter down to the local levels. Clear actions at the local level, with more regulation, stricter standards, additional online monitoring, which add incentives to all players on the production chain, are important. This can be supported by the people through social media, companies realizing and taking responsibility for environmental issues, and non-governmental organizations. Estimations about the cost of environmental pollution have been difficult to find during the years. In 2006, the Ministry of Environmental Protection began releasing an estimate of the cost of environmental degradation. The statistics were issued only intermittently, though its original goal was to do a calculation, what it called green GDP, annually, and for 2010. The number reached 230 billion, an equivalent to 3.5% of the nation's gross domestic product, 3 times the estimated amounts calculated for 2004. The figure is based on costs arising from pollution and damage to the ecosystem, the price that China is paying for its rapid industrialization, and it is incomplete since it does not cover all the data, the source said. Another report developed by the World Bank in 2007, covering different years and sectors of the Chinese economy, estimates the physical and economic cost of air and water pollution in China. This cost is reflected in the pollution-related disease burden, pollution-exacerbated water scarcity, wastewater irrigation, loss of fisheries and crops, and accounts for 4.3% of the GDP of the country. By adding the non-health impacts of pollution, which are estimated to be about 1.5% of GDP, the total cost of air and water pollution in China is actually about 5.8% of GDP, which demonstrates costs that are higher than the official estimations. The study also found that the burden of both air and water pollution is not distributed evenly across the country, being that China's poor areas are disproportionately affected by the environmental health burden, and only 6 provinces account for 50% of the effects of acid rain in the country. Analyzing the situation from the theory of economics, it is clear, just considering the costs mentioned, that pollution is a negative externality and shows in some way how inefficient the Chinese market is. Many economists agree that unless there is a strong and effective environmental policy, that society will generate too much pollution, as is happening in China today, where the economy is really far away from reaching a socially optimal quantity of pollution. Leaving the different players to achieve an agreement in order to cut pollution seems unreasonable. The Coase theorem is very difficult to consider in China's case, so a clear and direct action from the government is necessary. Emission taxes can also be a solution, but not in the way China is using them today, known as a Pigovian tax. There is consensus now that China's decades of double-digit economic growth have generated an enormous environmental cost. But still, growth remains as the priority. The Communist Party's legitimacy is based largely on rapidly expanding the economy, and China officially estimates that its GDP, which is 8.3 trillion in 2012, will grow at a rate of 7.5% this year, and at an average of 7% in their 5-year plan that runs through 2015. Last month, the third plenum of the Communist Party was held in Beijing, where the new reforms were set up to face the Chinese future. Even it was expected a more clear direction on the environmental issues. The communique released after the meetings was not so direct. In constructing eco-civilization, it is imperative to build a sound system and to protect the ecological environment through the system, says the report in one part. The system concerning property rights of natural resources as assets and the administration of their use should be improved, says the communique in another part. The document urged drawing a, quote, red line for ecological protection, implementing a system of paid use of the resources and ecological compensation, and reforming the system for the protection and administration of the ecological environment. But still, actions must be shown from the central and local governments. An economist from the IHS Global Insight firm pointed out early this year in an interview with the New York Times that, quote, digging a hole and filling it back in again gives you GDP growth. It doesn't necessarily give you economic value. A lot of the activity in China over the last few years has been digging holes and filling them back in again. Anything from bailing out solar companies to ignoring the externalities of economic growth. Looking back at how China has grown and the environmental costs associated with it, the questions are clear. Is China really creating value for its society? Will the ecological red line pronounced by the government in November provide the right incentives and effective incentives to change directions towards sustainable growth? And will this start addressing the environmental problems China faces today? This is the report of the Gemba14 Team A4 about China's environmental situation and challenges.
心传来，爱心传来。